for an all-time standpoint on offense, just an all-time standpoint on offense, who was the most underrated offensive player of all time?
The most underrated offensive player for me was a wide receiver in the 2000s who doesn't get the love he deserves. Give me Greg Jennings. Greg Jennings was a wide receiver who could do it all. Greg Jennings could be a deep threat. He'd be a guy who would catch the ball in the middle. He could be a guy who could beat his man 1v1. Playing with Aaron Rodgers, I don't think he really got the credit he deserved with Greg Jennings, a type of guy who, probably got overlooked in that era with wide receivers when you have guys like Larry Fitz, when you guys have like Terrell Owens, Randy Moss, Chad Ochocinco, and those boys. When you have wide receivers like that, a guy like Greg Jennings definitely gets overlooked. If he played in a different era of wide receivers, he probably gets more love in terms of and frankly more accolades than he did deserve. He made a couple Pro Bowl teams, but he could have been an all-pro level receiver if he was in the era with a little less. His 1,200 yard season in 2008. He gave another 1,100 season 2009, 2010, 1,200 yards. This is a guy with 2 seasons with 12 plus touchdowns catching the ball. Greg Jennings is a guy that just got overlooked time and time again when we talk about wide receivers in the 2000s, especially the late 2000s. He put up the numbers. He was there for Aaron Rodgers he was there for Aaron Rodgers early on in Aaron Rodgers' career to do his thing. Greg Jennings, frankly, had no weaknesses as a wide receiver too. Once again, could beat his man. Had the speed, had the hands, was able to find the empty space within the end zone to get those touchdowns. Greg Jennings, a guy that a lot of people overlooked. And we talking underrated, we talking about a guy like Greg Jennings, who was the wide receiver who was underrated for that era.
The most underrated player in NFL history on offense is none other than Steve Smitty Smith. Come on, guys. We're talking about a guy who, in the era of Randy Moss, Terrell Owens, Chad Johnson, Torrey Hall, Isaac Bruce, won the Triple Crown, and it didn't get won again for another 15 years when Cooper Kupp did. The boy had to think for 15 years. Had Jake DeLong. You're talking about Greg Jennings with Aaron Rodgers. What would Steve Smith be if he had Aaron Rodgers or Peyton Manning or Tom Brady? He had Jake DeLong, and with Jake DeLong, he was putting up consistently 1,300, 1,400 yards. We're talking about a guy who was top 10 in receiving yards, 14,000 all time, 1,200 catches, 85 touchdowns, started the league as a Pro Bowler with a kick, doing kick returns, and still cooked all the way to the end of his career, helping out Cam Newton, getting 1,300 yards with Cam, then went to the Baltimore on his last leg and gave you 1,000 yards, and was still cooking in Baltimore, but he was just getting too old. Dog, if Steve Smith had the quarterbacks that a lot of these generational quarterbacks had, Carson Palmer, come on now, even a Tony Romo, dog, Steve Smith got to be one of the most unguardable, toughest, pound-for-pound receivers of all-time history. And an era where the receivers was the best. He could say, for a couple years, I was the best receiver. For at least one of them years with Randy and Terrell Owens on the league, I led the league in touchdowns, catches, and receiving yards with Jake DeLong, my quarterback. Steve Smith is easily the most underrated fucking player in NFL history, offense and defense.
Steve Smith is a good answer, but the correct answer to me is Andre Johnson. Andre Johnson. He had three 1,500 yard seasons with some of the worst quarterbacks I've ever seen. Yo, Jalen, do you know who Sage Rosen?
Y'all naming great wide receivers, players who everyone knows is great.
Do you know who Sage Rosen is?
Jalen.
Matt Leinart. Matt Schaub was Andre Johnson's best quarterback. Matt Schaub. The same guy who threw 20, 30 INTs? Who I think he threw 3 pick sixes in a game one time? That was his best QB. I think 2012, he was probably the second best receiver besides Calvin Johnson. He was unstoppable. He was beyond physical. He was a bully ball receiver. Think of AJ Brown on crack. That was what Andre Johnson really was. And he had Arian, the only other weapon on his team was Arian Foster, Mr. Vegan, who as soon as he went vegan, broke down immediately. I don't know what that was about. So Andre Johnson was, to me, one of my 5 favorite receivers ever. We also saw what happens when you try to bucket him. We saw what happened with Finnegan and how he whooped that boy. But Matt Leinart, Matt Schaub, Ryan Fitzpatrick, Case Keenum, those are the QBs he was dealing with on a daily basis. That's low-key a crime. And he had 3 1,500 yard seasons, another 1,400 season. I think his second season he had 1,000 yards. He finally getting his recognition in the Hall of Fame. But people are just really realizing how much he really got hoed, because the Texans franchise did not deserve him. The way Calvin Johnson didn't deserve the Lions, Andre Johnson did not deserve the Texans.
It's the player choice way. Yeah, them boys don't get it started. The player choice way. The player choice way. Come and switch lanes into the player choice way.